Alright guys, we did it. We achieved the impossible. That's right. 20,000 horsepower. Just kidding, that's just from playing around with solid state stuff. So we're not even done doing solid state tuning just yet. Alright, first off, let me apologize. I know in the last video, the video wasn't very clear, and I apologize for that. I was doing a screen recording, and I thought that would work, but it didn't. So anyways, I spent some time here to get it. So we're only looking at the checkmark runs, which are the top 3 runs. You can see 12, 14, and 17 there. So another thing that I do want to explain here is that this is a calculated number. This is actually the raw numbers here. When I say calculated, this is actually to the engine. So I don't know why it's like listed like that in the Sport Devices software, but this is actually like the raw data here. So if we're looking at sheer power, you can see at 12 to 14 psi, there's about a 6 horsepower gain, but from 14 to 17 psi, there's about a 5, maybe 6 horsepower gain. So the thing is that to make 5 horsepower, it took 2 psi, but from here, it took 3 psi to make essentially the same power. Now, so like I said, that's just what I wanted to go over a little bit. Like I said, I know it was really bad in the last video, and I do apologize for that, guys, but that's where it's at right there. And like I said, 17 might not be too much for this turbo. You know, if you keep that in mind, like the Ford Focus STs, those have extremely small turbos, and they do run upwards of 20, you know what I mean? So 17 might not the end all be all, or 14 might not the end all be all, but 17, like I said, we're starting to see diminished returns. So we have to really weigh in, is the diminished returns really worthwhile? Now, like I said in my last video, on the E85 that might be a different story, because the turbo is going to run a little bit cooler because of ethanol, and we may be able to push it a little bit harder. So that's what we're about to find out. So people are going to ask, well, why can't I run 15 or 16 psi? Well, why is it only 14 or 17? Well, the problem is that the boost control, its control is not that precise. So for instance, at 12 psi, well, let's take it a step back. At wastegate pressures, which is 8 or 9 psi, right? I had to turn it all the way up to 60 wastegate duty cycle before I could even see 12. So that tells me that's my control range. So from 12 to 14 though, it went from 60 to 65%, then 65 to 70%. And as you can see, that it's not like, oh, add 2.5%, you get 1 psi. It just doesn't work that way. So anything that was in between 65% to 70%, it was either 14 or 17 and nothing in between. And that could be because, you know, the turbocharger is really small, so that, and the wastegate is also very small. So there's not a lot of finite control there. If we were to go external wastegated, I mean, that would fix a lot of the problems. Boost control would be a lot better. But come on, guys, let's be realistic here. The reason why we were looking at the E07Z swap to begin with is, besides turbo noises, is that it's a cheap replacement for the E07A. And really, like, are you guys really going to spend all this money just for better boost control? You know what I mean? You're going to spend way more money on external wastegate than the cost of the whole motor is going to be. And honestly, guys, let's be real. Look at this little hole here. That hole, like, no kidding, is like, maybe for you older guys, you guys are going to know what this is, but it's maybe the diameter of a 50-cent piece. I know you younger guys don't know what actual cash money is, but once upon a time there used to be a 50-cent coin, and that's like the diameter of it. You know, there's no way that we're going to get like super precise turbo control over there. We're just not. So, but again, like I said, why would we go through all this hassle just to get better boost control? So this is the cold start video for the Beat on E75, E76. So the ambient temperature is about 56 degrees. I've got it sort of dialed in with the 3D tables. So So the warm-up's not as good as I would like it to be. We're gonna go ahead and richen this up here a bit. Now the thing is that keep in mind that I am currently in Texas right now. We're gonna have to revisit this when the car goes back home to Chicago, and we'll have to do some more playing with like cold start and warm-up enrichment. Keep in mind though, another thing that I've said before in my videos is that this car doesn't have an idle valve. So there's a good chance that when the time does come, when you know it's super cold outside on ethanol, that when he goes to crank it, once it starts, he's probably gonna have to hold the throttle to get it like staying running and stuff like that. But not too bad right now in 56 degrees. So what we're gonna do is next week we actually will be having some extremely cold temperatures. So I'm trying to get my E85 tuning done, and then from there I can deal with cold start, so I don't have to open the bay doors and freeze my ass off. So there's that. All right, so we made a couple adjustments, changed the fuel injector size and stuff like that. We had to go ahead and add a secondary fuel table just to be on the safe side. So we're gonna let it, I'm gonna go ahead and let it warm up, come up to op temp while it's running on ethanol. So we're currently at 76% ethanol. So we're running this complete table 2 here. And then I'm also going to message Link real quick to see why we don't have 3D tables. And then go from there. But basically I've just got to let it warm up completely before I start making any more changes to it. And hopefully that fixes it right there. And then we will go from there. Over a couple things here. First and foremost, try to ignore this bottom part. Basically what happened was I would let off the throttle and then end the run, and that's why it looks all goofy like this, but you know, we don't really care too much about that. So first and foremost, let's look at just peak numbers here. So this red run here is the final run on 14 pounds of boost on 93, and then this yellow run here is actually just the fuel dialed in from steady state tuning with no timing added at all. And remember, the boost is about the same with the exception of a little bit of creep. Now, if you look here at the peak numbers, you'll see that 59 and 60, they're basically the exact same runs, right? Like there's no real difference in peak number. But I wanted to show you guys this. Like peak numbers are important, right? It tells us whether we gained or not. But what people seldom ever take into account is the area in the curve. Like if you look here, this yellow run is our E85 run. And you can see that everywhere it is so much better than the 93 run. So this is, and I want to mention Kai. You know, Kai has our EMU set up on an E07A, and he's even mentioned it before that the car on E85 just feels so much better all around, even though the same thing's reflected here is that the peak numbers aren't that great. So you can clearly see that the E85 does make a difference. Now, one other thing that I want to do, another thing I also want to mention is that with E85, I was able to do run after run after run after run, and then let it cool down a little bit in between, and the numbers were relatively repeatable. All right, so we got a couple more runs in. Have not touched boost at all. We've just been working on the fuel table and ignition table a little bit. So the boost control tables are the exact same, but because we're on ethanol, it's actually starting to creep a little bit in boost. And it's not bad. We're seeing 220 kPa, so 120 pounds of boost, or 120 kPa worth of boost which actually nets to be about the 17 PSI range. But it does dip off pretty quickly. So we're gonna take a look at this log here. So we're gonna take a look at this green line here. And if you look at the green line, you'll see that we're seeing 220. But like every internal wastegate car, it eventually drops to 14 by red line, so 200 kPa. And just to give you an idea, we go wide open throttle at 2500 RPM. And you can see it on this log here. If you look, that's TPS right there. So we're gonna zoom in here, and there we go at 100. The moment I hit mash the throttle, we're already in boost. So we've got 8 kPa worth of boost the moment I nail it. And look at the RPM versus the boost. And so from 2500 to 3000 RPMs, we're already at 7 pounds of boost. And look, we hit 14 pounds of boost at 3500 RPM. So this motor is super responsive. And you see that we're already 17 PSI range by 4000 RPMs. And it holds it all the way up to 5. And then as you can see at the very end, it drops down. So it's doing pretty good here. Temps are picking up pretty quickly on IAT. 55 degrees Celsius is like 130 Fahrenheit already, and the ambient temperature is about 50 degrees right now, so it's heating up pretty quickly. So here we are. We've actually added about over 93, mind you. We've added probably about another 5 degrees of timing overall. The boost level is the same with the exception of the spike. There's nothing I can do about the spike at the very beginning, but power actually has come up about 10 horsepower. So here is our 14 PSI run, and here is our E85 run here, our very last one that we just did. And you can see that it's come up quite a bit. Now torque is starting to fall off. So remember, aux torque here is wheel torque. And you can see that torque is starting to level out. So that kind of tells me that we're not really making any more, torque is not adding any more timing, is not really netting any more torque. So I think that's really about it about ignition timing. And I'm gonna do something that's actually pretty counterintuitive. I'm actually going to pull 2 degrees back out of it just to keep it on the safe side. And we're gonna turn the boost up. I'm gonna see what 17 pounds of boost nets us. All right, so our new run, as you can see, lost a little bit of power, but actually gained a little bit of torque. That's not uncommon, but realistically, let's look at the numbers here. So we can see that it creeps really high, obviously, in the very beginning. So that obviously is showing us that the gain there. But as you follow the yellow line along, you can see that it drops off pretty heavily. So 17 PSI again is just not the ticket. We're gonna turn it back down because it's not doing anything. Yes, this little added bit of torque in the very beginning is nice, but it's not really doing anything. Now, with that being said, we could leave it up here at 17 PSI, and then from the rest of the way, basically essentially from 4000 RPMs and up, we can just turn it back down to 14. And that would be fine. There's not a problem with that. But the question is that, is there any real longevity that's going to, what's the longevity of it going to be like? So at that point, I just don't know if it's really worthwhile. So again, this is our final run here. Okay, we're gonna look at peak numbers, which as you can see is not very much, 67 and 85 foot-pounds of torque. So we basically gained 10 horsepower, 10 torque. Same boost, just more timing and fueling about the same, right? And you can see again, over the curve, everything looks a lot better, right? Now, again, let's talk about peak numbers for a second. Yes, 60 and 70 horsepower is not a lot to talk about. But if you think about it factually, right, that is a 15% gain. So not only are we roughly the same boost level, we've added a little bit more timing. The only thing that we've really changed besides timing is the fuel, right? E70. And you can see that there are huge gains involved. Now, you know, as you guys know, you know, when we talk about K cars and we say, oh, 60 horsepower, 70 horsepower, obviously that's not amazing, right? But if you think about it this way, that these motors are only rated to like 60 to the wheels, you know? So we're making that and then some, and the car's perfectly safe. You know, we've got all these extra add-ons and features and stuff like that. So the only downside of this swap that I could say is that wrapping out to 6500 doesn't seem great. You know, our gearing is not very good to begin with, and I am concerned about having a 6500 RPM rev limiter. Now, you know, the reason why we stuck to 6500 was because everything that we could find in Japanese or English was that the limiter set at 6500. Now, I could in fact raise the limiter to 72, and that might be okay, but it definitely won't make any more power. And that's only just basically just going to allow us to rev it. So again, according to Wikipedia, right, the max horsepower that it makes is 6,300 at 6,000 RPMs. So that's pretty in line there. And then the torque, the max torque that it makes is about 70 foot-pounds of torque at 3,700. So that's basically in line there on pump gas. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So like I said, overall, I mean, I'm assuming that these are still rated at crank. I don't know if they're rated at wheel or not. If you guys, again, if you guys want to chime in and correct me, I'm more than happy to take that information in.